Labour's postpones 28 billion green plan as it seeks to be trusted on public finances. Rachel Reeves says fiscal rule is priority as she delays start of promised investment in eco-friendly industry. This is in The Guardian, which is obviously favourable to Labour and Starmer and Reeves. Labour has scaled back plans to borrow £28 billion a year to invest in green jobs and industry as the party's leadership looked to review its spending in an attempt to prove its fiscal credibility. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves delayed plans for a Green Prosperity Fund to start in the first year of a Labour government, saying it would ramp up by the middle of the first parliament. She said the decision had to be taken as a result of the poor economic backdrop and rising interest rates after Liz Truss's short premiership crashed the markets last autumn. The Guardian understands Labour has also been looking closely at how to keep other areas of major spending within its fiscal rules. Insiders said the party had been looking to make sacrifices in areas it had already flagged as important to demonstrate its focus on economic credibility. And she said the priority was sticking to Labour's fiscal rule that debt must be falling as a share of national income after 5 years. No plan can be built that is not a rock of economic and fiscal responsibility. I will never play fast and loose with the public finances, Rachel said on Friday. She said her fiscal rules would be non-negotiable, so Labour would move to the £28 billion green investment gradually rather than immediately if the party won the next election. Reeves said she was on the same page as Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, and Ed Miliband, the Shadow Energy Secretary, regarding the need to scale back the ambition of the plan. One senior Labour source said there's been a recognition for some time that given the change in interest rates from when Rachel made the original announcement to where we are today, that a clarification was required. It seemed to make sense to get out there and say it explicitly. While Reeves stressed the fiscal discipline of the move, Miliband later told the BBC's World at One that also it was partly a matter of practicality as it could take some time to get supply chains ready for the 28 billion of spending. The party is 100% not abandoning our plan, he added. There you go. I've read it all out. Now, the green issue is so important that it to sort of override that with this idea of fiscal responsibility. What does that show about Labour's priorities? And also, what is their? Are they sane financially, economically? Is their thinking right?
Well, it's not just this green investment they are abandoning, because what Labour was crowing about was this thing called they were going to create Great British Energy, a new publicly owned clean energy company. And the target was that by 2030, we were going to have 100% clean energy. That is all gone out of the window. Green investment and the jobs and the prosperity was going to grow. That is gone out of the window. And I think in a sense, it indicates a deeply flawed approach to policy making. So this green energy commitments lasted a little bit longer than Starmer's 10 leadership pledges and the promise that there won't be university tuition fees. And it is really a self-inflicted wound. A couple of weeks ago, I appeared on this show to talk about Bidenomics, which Rachel Reeves said she was embracing. And immediately afterwards, I published a public document which had policies which can't be reconciled. For example, public debt, as you mentioned, would fall. There would be no hikes in capital gains tax, no increase in corporation tax, no 50% ban for the rich, no subsidies. But somehow we were going to invest £140 billion in green energy. Tories immediately latched on to that and said, how do you reconcile it? Well, you can't reconcile it within the current policy framework. And if you're making policies in an echo chamber and you purge all critical voices and alternative voices, this is what you're going to get. Now, I don't understand why Labour is obsessed about reducing the public debt. The highest public debt we had is currently close to 100% of GDP. We had 252% of GDP public debt in 1947. That was used to rebuild society, create the National Health Service, rejuvenate railways, steel, almost, any industry you can think of. Now, markets think short term. Governments must think long term. So what Labour at the moment is concerned about is a market reaction. Well, just tell them what you're going to do, as our manifesto in 2017 and 19 did. You don't have to follow the Tory straitjacket of fiscal rules. So that is really voluntary. Okay, that is not really necessary. The other thing is, Labour does not question what does public debt include. So let me just give you a couple of examples. Public debt includes nearly £1 trillion of quantitative easing, which is, in my view, not really a debt, because government holds corporate bonds and government gilts. And what the government did was it first flooded the market with cash by buying corporate bonds and government gilts. And then somebody said, oh my God, that is really causing financial assets and a lot of property values to rocket. You now have to withdraw some cash. Therefore, they forced banks to hand some money back, and then they pay them interest. An analogy is, imagine a farmer grows some carrots, he gives them away free, and then says, well, I need some carrots, I'll buy them back off you. And then says, by the way, how about lending me some carrots as well, and I will pay you interest on it. And that is essentially what the government is doing. So Labour is firstly not dissecting the profiteering by the city on the back of government printing money. If that is taken out, our public debt is considerably small. And of all people, Jacob Rees-Mogg is agreeing with what I've just said. He's saying the public debt is very small and there's a considerable capacity for governments to borrow and rebuild society. The other thing is Labour has ruled out, for example, increasing the capital gains tax, aligning it with income tax and charging national insurance on the same, that is £25 billion a year. Then there is another fundamental error in Labour's thinking. Anyone who runs a business makes a distinction between revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Okay, revenue is for day-to-day, capital is long-term investment. If Labour is going to borrow for long-term investment, well, then that is a good thing. And that is what the post-war governments did. At that time, we had what I call an entrepreneurial state. Entrepreneurial state was interested in long-term investment and also eventually created the aerospace industry, information technology industry, biotechnology industry. But now we don't have an entrepreneurial state, really. We instead have a state which is a guarantor of corporate profits, such as through PFI, privatizations, outsourcing, subsidies to oil and gas companies. We are committed to paying billions to them to decommission North Sea oil, gas and rigs. We are subsidizing privatized railways who are paying record dividends. Yeah, so the role of the state needs to be structured. So what I'm finding is Labour is caught by its own inadequacies and own traps. It is trying to appease actually conservative voters, neglecting what really needs to be done for long-term prosperity. And this is really the problem. So fundamentally, Labour needs to change its policy-making model. You can't just have like-minded people in a room and agreeing. So additional thought. When I was asked some years ago by John McDonnell to help develop some policies, I formed various groups, which included business people who did not necessarily agree with us, but also academics and others, because I wanted critics in to tell us what could go wrong. Yeah. So did nobody within Labour Party ask that if you're giving a commitment not to increase taxes, you're giving a commitment to reduce the public debt as it is constituted now, but you want to invest more, how is that going to be done? What would be the issues? Did nobody ask those questions? I find that really astonishing and very, very poor piece of policy making development, really.
Yeah. It's quite scary that it's so amateurish and sort of like just playing to the media and we're responsible with the with money, and we don't spend more than we can afford, and all that kind of simple economics that isn't really what we need. It's not certainly not what you've been putting forward for so long.
I think, there is a fundamental misunderstanding in the Tory and Labour, at least public comments. They are assuming you raise money through taxes and you spend. Actually, no government has actually done that, ever. You spend first. So the Attlee government said what vision it had of society, what kind of society it wants, raise money, and then, think about the tax and related issues later. I don't recall my parents or earlier generations sitting around anywhere around the dinner table or in a pub and saying, "Oh my God, public debt is too high. Life is going to be desperately impossible." No, they said, "Hang on, government's created new prosperity, and we are all going to benefit, and debt will take care of itself." And besides, now we live in an era where money is not printed anymore. It is simply created with a stroke of a key. And the government showed us that it can do that. It's done, nearly £1 trillion of quantitative easing. Just imagine if that was used to rebuild society, to put in green jobs, rejuvenate manufacturing, or anything else. So Labour has plenty of options, but why it has chosen Tory policies is really beyond understanding. Maybe the donors are twisting the leadership's arms, and maybe they're more concerned about short-term priorities, but government must focus on the long term. Now, so Labour is saying in the second half of Parliament, they might restore this investment. Suppose it is not in Parliament, not in office after 5 years, then what? Or where would be the benefits? And that, again, doesn't really make any sense. And I just wonder what Ed Miliband makes of all this, because basically they're pulled the rug really from the policy he was really vigorously promoting.